Okay, good morning. Good morning. I will introduce myself really quickly. My name is June Grace Simba Jones. I work with Equity Smart Home Loans and United Wholesale Mortgage Company, who, as most people know, have become the number one lender in the country and very close to becoming the number one lender in the world, actually. And I am joined by Andrew. Do you say your name is Hoek?
I actually pronounce it Hook, which it just doesn't look like Hook at all, but that's how I was trained to say it as a kid. So
Okay, Andrew Hoek, who is with Tampa Bay Title Company.
Old Tampa Bay Title, yeah.
Old Tampa Bay Title Company. I'm so thankful to have you here because the conversation about using a real estate attorney or a title professional in the whole real estate transaction, I keep bringing it up because I would love to know the benefits of using one versus going without one.
Yeah, absolutely. What state are you in, just out of curiosity?
So I live in North Carolina.
Okay.
And but I'm focused on Florida.
Gotcha.
My license is in Florida.
Okay.
My office is in North Miami Beach, actually, which I'm never there.
Okay.
So I have a team in Miami, in the Miami area, and then also California, Arizona, and Washington State, and
Wonderful.
Texas.
Okay. I saw the Panthers chair back there, so I wasn't sure exactly.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So I'm in Tampa Bay. We're pretty much right across the state from your Miami offices, a little north, of course. But and so Florida, as you know, is not an attorney state, and that's a conversation that we have with a lot of clients. People that come from the Northeast, or they're coming from Georgia or South Carolina, a number of different states that we see people transplant from, are used to having an attorney required to be the closing agent or at least involved in the transaction. And that's different than how we do things in Florida, where you can be a title company and you don't have to be an attorney to close a transaction. So I always think of it as a double-edged sword, honestly. It's we kind of stand out as an attorney owned and operated title company. And I guess before I jump into that too much, let me tell you how we're set up. So we have the law firm, which is a full service law firm. We have a real estate practice team, which I chair, and we've got a number of real estate attorneys that work with me in that practice group. And then as an affiliate company, we have the title company, Old Tampa Bay Title, where we close commercial and residential transactions. And so, as a real estate attorney in the state of Florida, it obviously gives us a competitive advantage in the title industry. We close a lot of deals for clients who basically, are, as I said, are used to having an attorney in a transaction and want to have that attorney touch on a file. And so, from our perspective, as I was saying, it is a double-edged sword in the sense that not having a title companies or allowing title companies obviously opens up some more competition for us, because you don't have to be an attorney to close a transaction, but it also allows us to stand out amongst our peers. And further, it also creates some additional legal work for us because mistakes happen and people are handling files that, maybe they are over their head on type thing. And all of a sudden something glitches and goes wrong. And now there's a corrective issue that has to occur. And we're brought in a legal capacity to fix some of those things for clients that have used some of our competitors. And so it's a good and bad thing from us. But the key benefits, I think, of having an attorney involved in your transaction are that, we are in a real estate transaction. We're somewhat of a unique position in the sense that every other party is only being compensated if the deal closes. So there's financial incentive to most parties to get a deal closed, whether it's the right deal or not. And I don't like to throw that out blanketly just because, obviously most agents, most brokers, most title folks are good people, and they've got the best interest of people in mind, but there's a financial incentive for them to get a deal done. From our perspective, as an attorney, we're looking at things to make sure that the deal is actually appropriate. I never consider myself a deal killer by any means. I know that some attorneys get that reputation, and it's like, well, how do we get a deal to litigation as opposed to actually getting to the closing table? I'm a transactional attorney, so I actually like getting deals to the closing table, but they're going to be on the correct terms and on the proper channels. And so, it's something that we take a unique position in the file because we're truly an objective party. It doesn't honestly matter to me whether the deal closes or not. If it's the right deal for the client and it's going to be a win for them, obviously we want to help them get to the table and make sure that the deal happens. But if there's something that is glaringly wrong, or there's an issue, we're uniquely positioned to say, pump the brakes, stop, don't pursue this for this property, pursue a different property, that type of thing. So that's one key component. The other is that, it's really a second set of eyes for everybody. So in most real estate transactions, we're looking at everything from contract to close. So it's an A to Z representation of all of your paperwork is reviewed, your due diligence is reviewed, your surveys, your appraisals, your title work, your closing documents, all those things are things that we're looking at as a second set of eyes to make sure that there aren't errors on. And so it's kind of a nice key component for people to just have that sense of security, to say we feel like somebody's actually looking out for us, and there's somebody who's going to potentially catch something that might not be caught otherwise. So, but those are really, those are really the key components of how, we're utilizing the real estate transaction, and I think how we kind of stack up against some of our others. As far as, how do we stand out against, just the title company down the street? The example I use a lot of times is one of our biggest clients actually came to us because they were working with another title company that was not attorney owned and operated, and they had a file, and then the title company said, because of an underwriting flag, we can't close this file. So we took a look at the file, and I said, I don't think that this position is correct, and here's why. And I'll save the details on that because it's kind of a snooze fest. But the takeaway is that the position that the title underwriter took on that file was somewhat appropriate, but it wasn't fully appropriate if you knew all the information. And so once we explained what was going on, then the title underwriter said, okay, we'll clear that exception. You're good to go. You can close. And we now have that client for life because we saved that deal for them. We were able to close it. They didn't have to go. They would have had to go and probate and quiet title is what the requirements from the other title company were calling for, which is a long judicial process. Mm-hmm. And basically what it comes down to is that most, not all, but most underwriters tend to be in-house attorneys. And so for me to go have a peer-to-peer conversation with a real estate attorney and say, hey, let's discuss why you're taking this position and how you're getting there and arriving at it, versus somebody who's not an attorney, is two very different conversations. And so it allows us to basically, potentially close files that other people can't, just because of the fact that we have probably a slightly better understanding of some of the legal issues that the underwriters are thinking about. So but that's really, I think, our key advantage in how we set ourselves out against our peers. So,
my question is, do you help a buyer or seller structure a deal? For example, if someone has a significant amount of land and the developer comes in and says, proposes to buy all of it or some of it, do you help structure those deals? And if you do, is there a way to sell a piece of land or property with lifetime, what do you call it? Lifetime residual income from the appraising value of it? I don't know if I'm asking this right, but is there a way to sell land or property in a way that the seller will always get a percentage of the appraisal,
Value. There are, I mean, there are circumstances like that where, if somebody's a large landowner, for example, it doesn't have to be a large landowner. They could just be a parcel owner. But depending on the structure, where if they're entering into, some form of agreement with a builder or developer, they can certainly stake out those terms to say, we're willing to sell this to you for X price. But as a condition of the sale upon development, we want a portion of the proceeds, for example, or, some sort of continuing residual that flows off the property. I mean, there's a number of ways that can be structured.
Okay.
And so in those developments, development capacity, a lot of times there are things like that, especially where you have a party who maybe, some examples are sometimes people literally just contribute the land to the deal. And then they basically become a partner in the development deal. So there's ways to structure that, or they can sell it. And as part of the sale, they can find ways to, get what I would call a kicker there, basically saying that they're getting something additional above and beyond maybe just the sale price. So
these are, I'm finding these are things that people are really sparking people's interest, as opposed to what they think or heard everybody uses a real estate attorney or a title advisor for.
Sure.
Once I start chatting with people about just creative out of the box ways, all of a sudden now it creates this whole new perception, an empowered perception of, I want to know more. So that's an area I would love to maybe talk to you more on once I iron out what I think would be interesting to the most amount of number of listeners.
Sure.
So as far as deeds negotiation, can you touch on why you think using Old Tampa Bay, for example, would benefit a buyer or seller?
When you say deed negotiation, what do you mean exactly?
Well, no, I jumbled that up. So negotiation as one area and then deed filing as a second area.
Okay, gotcha.
Separate.
Yeah. So, I mean, from a negotiation perspective, a lot of times the upfront negotiation has been done when it comes to us because, of course, the agents are taking that action and negotiating the contract. There are circumstances, especially in our commercial practice areas, where we take probably more of an active role in the negotiation. For example, I've got a deal right now that we're working on that's a development deal in Sarasota, and they're in contract, but in due diligence, they've found some things that the buyer is uncomfortable with. And so now we're basically renegotiating to see if that deal can still get to the closing table. And so, from that perspective, we definitely take a more active role than we do if it's just a purely residential file that's coming over to us, it's already in contract. Where I think that, we come into play as an attorney, and then I'll touch on the title component of it in a moment, but in a residential capacity from a negotiation perspective is, if there's some glitch found in due diligence, like let's say again that there's some sort of title defect, or or a good example I can use is not too long ago I did a deal where the survey revealed an encroachment of a fence, and so that's a fairly common issue. But this particular client was moving from New York, and it was something that they had dealt with in a prior purchase in New York, and they were very uncomfortable with it. And they said, from prior history, this is something that, was a huge deal for us. We're not comfortable with it. So that was where we were able to kind of step in and say, let's take a look at the actual circumstance here. Let's take a look at, what's going on. And what ended up happening actually was that it was in an HOA, and the HOA had an easement for, I think it was maintenance of drainage ponds, basically. And so this fence had been built into the easement, and it was flagged as an encroachment on the survey. So the client was really uncomfortable with that, because they said, "Well, there's an encroachment on the survey." And so I said, "Let's take a deeper dive and look at it." Well, once we looked at it, there's a specific exception in the HOA declaration that says you can actually build your fence into it. So basically, it became a moot point. But that's something that, wouldn't have been caught. Otherwise, that person would have freaked out. They would have said, "I'm pulling out of this deal," and that deal wouldn't have happened. And that was a way we were able to kind of add value to say, let's pump the brakes a second. Let's take a look at it, make sure whether it really is a big deal or not. And in that instance, it wasn't, and that deal was able to go forth and move forward. So I think that's kind of one way that we, is a benefit for us to help negotiate things or keep deals in the pipeline or alive, I guess maybe is a better way to say that. And then as it pertains to, actual like closing and deed recording, like a lot of title companies, we e-file, so we're really big on, if you close today, basically your documents are recorded same day, if not same day, by the next day. And so, there's very little gap period for us these days, which is really nice, because it cuts down on any potential title claims and issues. But it's also one of those things that we've invested. We're kind of early adopters on technology. And so we've invested ourselves, and we've invested the company into, making sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep up with, I guess, emerging trends, but also the importance of, unfortunately, real estate fraud gets more and more sophisticated every day. So being able to do the things to guard against it, such as, early recording and making sure that your software is really top notch and has security protocols and is portal backed and everything else. Emails are important, of course, as they're getting hacked constantly in the mainstream of things. And so things like that, I think, are what really helps set us apart too, from a standpoint of, making sure that we're protecting not only the parties, but the lenders involved and everybody else who's coming into the transaction. So.
Okay, great. Another really exciting area that I've been studying in different ways is how I think COVID has prodded and nudged a lot of us here, to become very entrepreneurial or more creative in the way that we live and generate income. A lot of people didn't want to go back to the office, so they're finding ways to make creative income. And this also kind of flows into real estate transactions in one sense. For example, a lot of people are looking to for investment properties, as opposed to just looking for a home and just looking at property as either home or work. So for example, Airbnbs have just been exploding. Rental properties have become more of a common goal for the normal person. And so I'm wondering how you all play a part in investment property transactions.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been seeing a spike in people looking at their properties as an investment tool or as a business tool? And how do you see your value in that transaction? Sure. Or those types of?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's a heck of a lot of trends that have come out of the post-COVID world, and certainly sort of the shuffling of population, and I think people's viewpoint of real estate has changed, as you indicated. So, we've seen a lot of people who have done everything from, take advantage of buying a second home potentially earlier, that now that they've bought it, but they're renting it while they're not utilizing it, for example. Their schedules maybe are a little more free than they were before. So instead of just having 2 weeks of vacation type thing. They can come down to Florida, work from Florida for 2 months, and then go back to wherever they're coming from, and then rent the property the rest of the time, that type of thing. So we see a lot of that. We have seen, we've seen also the kind of what I would call the early move retirement. So people will say, I'm still going to work for 5-10 years, but we want to move now because of the flexibility of allowing us to work somewhere else. And that actually is, they're doing the kind of the inverse, I guess. They're buying their new primary residence here and then turning around and renting their existing property wherever they're coming from. And so I think it is kind of creating an entirely new pool of what I would call sort of a passive real estate investor. I mean, obviously the Airbnb, I think, is a little more active, and we definitely see a lot of that here too. The challenge that we see with Airbnb is that, I think a lot of the desirable Airbnbs are kind of like the barrier islands and the beachfront stuff. And the beach municipalities here, at least locally, are very, very stringent on short-term rentals. So there's almost a squash effect as to short-term rentals in some of those beach communities. But it's, at the same token, it's sort of created this hotbed of short-term rentals in the urban core. And so Tampa and downtown St. Pete, there's a lot of, focus on that type of thing. And I think it brings in kind of a younger demographic that wants to travel and sort of be in the urban core and see those areas. So certainly a lot of, benefit locally that we've seen from all these changes. But, again, where do we come into play on that? I think a big thing, honestly, is what one of the things we just touched on was the restrictions, where, we'll see kind of novice investors come in and this is what I'm going to do. Okay, well, where do you want to do it? Well, I want to do it out at St. Pete Beach, for example. Well, St. Pete Beach has a lot of restrictions on short-term rentals. So you can't rent a property for a day, a week. I believe off the top of my head, their minimum rental is a month out there. So, can it work? Yes, if you have the appropriate property and you're dealing with the right type of renter. But it's not going to be the typical, I want a 6 or 7 day Airbnb rental out there. And so, educating clients on sort of the restrictions that they might see is a big part of what we do there. And then, I would say the other side of it is just making sure that that they're actually, getting what they're hoping for. I mean, one example we see a lot of actually is people will buy property from out of state that are not overly familiar potentially with like a condo association or a homeowners association. And above and beyond the fact that you have a municipal restriction on short-term rentals, potentially, you also can have an association restriction. And so, people will say, well, I'm going to buy, again, like a beach condo, for example. Well, let's take a look at the declaration for the association and make sure that there's not a limitation on it, because a lot of them will say the minimum rental you can have is 6 months or a year, that type of thing. So even if the municipality allows it, the association may not. And so a big part of what we do is kind of the educational component of that, making sure, again, that our main core job is that you are getting at the end of the day what you think you're buying. And that's what we want to make sure we're doing for clients. So.
Do you advise potential buyers or investors on foreclosures or the foreclosure buying process?
We do. So that used to be a really big part of our practice back in 2008, 9, 10, probably through 12, before the market really started to improve. We represent a lot of investors who buy distressed property. We have counseled clients on loss mitigation options. So during the kind of the foreclosure crisis, we did a lot of short sales for clients. So people would come to us and say, hey, I really need out of this property. I've got to move, or whatever the circumstances were, and I'm totally underwater on it. What can I do? So we would assist them A to Z on their short sale, and whatever their loss mitigations options were. So we do a lot of that. Fortunately, we haven't seen much of that in probably the last 5 or 6 years. With market shifts, I think we might start to see a little bit more here and there, but the good part so far is at least people have so much equity in their homes right now that it still is, they have a lot of options when it comes to if, suddenly they're falling behind or they have an issue, they can still sell without having too much of a problem. So,
Okay. Sounds good. And what about the buyer who is signing up for these online foreclosure lists and looking to buy a foreclosure property and doesn't know how to navigate the court part of it or the courthouse part of it? Do you see those happen a lot? Do you assist in those?
we do. So we kind of play a couple different roles in that on both the legal and the title side. One of the main things we're counseling people on, of course, is that if you're going to buy from auction, get a title search, because, the auctions are what the, and I believe almost every single county now does their auctions online pretty much. There might be a few handful that still do live, but those are small counties. But even on their websites, it'll say literally, do your own due diligence. This is totally buyer beware. It's Wild West. Like we've seen clients that have really unfortunately put themselves in bad positions because they didn't understand what they were buying. And they buy something that, for example, is like, either a second mortgage foreclosure or they're buying an HOA lien and there's still a first mortgage on the property and they buy those subject to those mortgages. So, we've seen clients that, just to give you an example, they'll buy something for, $100,000 thinking that they're getting this killer deal on a property only to find out that there's a $500,000 mortgage in front of it that hasn't been paid. And now that mortgagee is foreclosing. So, it's a situation where, you definitely want to do your due diligence up front. You want to make sure you have a title search. You want to make sure that you have that title search reviewed because, it's unless you truly can understand what you're looking at in a title search, you may not understand what the pitfalls are. And so for a lot of clients, they'll call us, they'll say, hey, we're looking at these 5 properties to bid on this month. Run me title searches and then tell me which ones are good to bid on and which ones are not, which ones we should avoid. And so we'll do that. And then on the title side, what we'll do is because you can't insure an auction until you actually have the title. So basically they will bid at auction. If they get the certificate of title, then they'll come to us and we'll insure it for them at that point. So we do a lot of that. We have kind of one of our attorneys in particular has a very niched practice that is almost geared exclusively at people who are buying at auction. And so, okay. We see a lot of that. And the one point I drive home or try to drive home as much as anything is do your upfront due diligence. Because unfortunately, I've seen so many people get burned in that process. And, they will literally be in tears and they're crying to the clerk of the court and the clerk of the court can't do anything. You bid on this, you bought it. We can't unwind it now. So
right. And then I think my last question is for the smaller scale investor who's looking to buy maybe a 5-unit or 6-unit property and turn it into a rental property. Is there an advantage of maybe using you as an alternative to a property management company? Or would you say use both?
I think that comes down to the how brave that buyer is, honestly. So we don't do any property management. I mean, we stay out of that side of it for sure. But
okay.
We have clients that like self-managing. I mean, if that's your day-to-day job and you want to make sure that your expenses are controlled and you're maximizing your profits on real estate, then and you can put up with the headaches of self-management, great. That it works. The one thing I always counsel people on though is make sure that you're compliant and that you're doing it legally and you're not running afoul of landlord tenant laws and things along those lines, of course. Mm-hmm. But there's some great property management companies as well too. And I mean, especially if you're more passive and you want to and you want to take sort of a back seat and collect your rent and have somebody else deal with the headaches, property management company can be a great option. So we never discourage that. I think it's a case by case basis. And I think it's something that that person has to determine whether it's in their capacity to self-manage or not. So,
okay. So Andrew, before I'm so grateful. I know you're really busy. Is there anything else that you would like to say as a representative of Old Tampa Bay Title Company that you would like our clients at UWM or Equity Smart to know before we wrap this up so that they can really keep you in mind?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak with you a little bit, and it's good to get to know you. But yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would drive home is that if ask who's closing your file. I mean, the market statistic that always blows my mind is that in counties where the buyer pays for the title insurance policy and picks the title insurer, attorneys overwhelmingly dominate those markets. And it's because the buyer wants to feel protected, wants to know what they're getting. In seller-driven markets, title companies actually dominate. And I think it's just more of a dynamic of, sellers are exiting the property. Not that they don't care, but it's less of a concern for them to say what happens in the future versus the buyer knowing what they're getting. And so, especially if you're in a market where title companies dominate and it's seller pick and pay is the custom, ask who's closing your file. Who's behind it? Are there attorneys in house, or is it an attorney owned title company? Do I have any access to an attorney? Those are all important things to be questioning. And then the other thing too is that it's the consumer's choice on who they use, and that's something that we try to educate people on ultimately. And a lot of times, consumers are very comfortable using the referrals from their agents, and that's great. I mean, a lot of agents have great referral sources, and those people can help. But at the end of the day, it's who they want to use and who they want to pick, because they're the ones that are ultimately paying for it as the buyer or the seller. It's not the agent's choice; it's the consumer's choice. And so, if you feel like you're getting pushed somewhere because your agent's pushing you somewhere, ask questions. Why are you pushing me here? Why are they better than everywhere else? And why shouldn't I at least go get a quote from somewhere else or talk to somebody else? Because you probably should. So
you should. Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, that's what I would close with, I think. So
all right. I did think of one quick last one.
Oh, sure.
How likely is it that you can help a buyer or seller after the transaction has happened? And if there's at any point, or if you do help buyers or sellers after they have signed that contract, is there a time frame that has to happen?
Sure. So there's always going to be a time frame on a potential breach of contract. In Florida, a lot of times breach of a written contract is 4 to 5 years. And so you have some time period to take care of those things after the fact. What I always tell clients, though, is that like most things, if you can deal with it up front versus on the back end, it tends to be easier to clean up and more cost effective. So, it's the analysis I always come up with, would you rather spend $1,000 up front knowing that you're going to be getting what you really need to get, or would you rather spend $20,000 on the back end trying to clean up some huge mess? And I think most people answer that on let's take care of it on the front end for a cheaper amount and make sure that we don't have the headache on the back end. So
sounds good. Thank you, Andrew. We will share your contact information, and thank you so much for this information, and have a good holiday season.
Yeah, you as well. So thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.